When I was in second grade, my best friend Emily started telling me strange stories about her house. She would always seem uneasy, her voice dropping to a whisper when she shared what had been happening. At first, it was just small things. Objects disappearing, strange creaks in the floorboards late at night. But as time went on, her stories grew darker and more unsettling. One day, while playing hide and seek in her house, she showed me something that had been troubling her for weeks. In her basement, which was cold and dimly lit, there was a small hole forming in one of the brick walls. The walls down there were made of rough cinder blocks, and the hole was appearing in the mortar between them. It was tiny at first, no bigger than a coin, but Emily swore it hadn't been there before. By the time we were in 5th grade, the hole had grown noticeably larger. You could fit most of your arm into it, though it was still narrow. Emily and I had a curious streak, so we dared each other to reach inside. No matter how far we pushed our arms, we couldn't touch the back of the hole. It seemed to go on forever, like a tunnel. But that wasn't the strangest part. Emily swore she started hearing whispers coming from the hole at night. She said it sounded like people murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. I visited her house often, but I never heard the voices myself. Still, I could see how much it terrified her. Emily would barely sleep, her eyes always darting around like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. Emily's house itself was unsettling. Her family had a huge collection of pets. Dogs, cats, birds, rabbits, and even a few exotic animals like snakes and a parrot that mimicked voices perfectly. The basement was where they kept a lot of the animal supplies, and strangely enough, Emily's pets seemed to avoid it at all costs. Her dogs, usually playful and brave, would refuse to go down the stairs. The cats, on the rare occasions they ventured down, would freeze and stare at the hole in the wall, their fur bristling. Then the disappearances started. Emily's pets would vanish for hours, sometimes even days. When they were finally found, they would always be in the basement, sitting stiffly near the hole, staring at it as though in a trance. No one could explain it. Her parents brushed it off as animals being weird. But Emily and I both knew something wasn't right. One weekend, during a sleepover at her house, I started noticing more unsettling details. Emily's bedroom was filled with stuffed animals of all shapes and sizes. They were everywhere, on her bed, her bookshelves, even hanging from the ceiling in nets. That night, we stayed up late talking and watching movies. When we finally fell asleep, it was well past midnight. The next morning, we woke up to find every single stuffed animal had been moved. They were stacked in the middle of the room in a pyramid-like structure almost as tall as we were. Every stuffed animal was positioned to face her bed, their glassy eyes fixed on us. We were frozen in terror. Emily swore she hadn't done it, and I knew I hadn't either. The sheer effort it would have taken to pile them all up without waking us was mind-boggling. Some of the toys had been on high shelves or inside closed cabinets, and yet here they were, perfectly arranged. We put the animals back, trying to convince ourselves it was just some weird prank. But the next night, things escalated. Around 3 a.m, we were jolted awake by a loud creaking sound coming from under the bed. It sounded like the wooden floorboards were straining under someone's weight. Terrified but curious, we leaned over the edge of the bed and peered underneath. What we saw made my blood run cold. One of the floorboards was slowly lifting up, as though someone or something beneath the floor was pushing it. Then, with a loud snap, it slammed back into place. We bolted upright, too scared to move. Emily clung to me, tears streaming down her face. The room was silent, but the tension was suffocating. We stayed awake until the first light of dawn, clutching each other and staring at the floor, afraid of what might happen next. The following morning, I begged my parents to come and pick me up. I couldn't stay in that house another night. Emily begged me not to leave her alone, but I was too scared. I promised I'd see her at school and that we'd talk more about what was happening, but after that weekend, I started avoiding her. I felt guilty, but the fear was too much. Emily's life only seemed to get worse after that. At school, she became withdrawn and jittery, her grades slipping as her anxiety grew. Teachers noticed and tried to help, but her parents didn't seem to take her seriously. The last time I spoke to her was at the end of the school year. She told me the hole in the basement had grown so large that she could crawl inside it if she wanted to. She said she often heard noises coming from deep within it, scraping sounds, whispers, and occasionally faint laughter. Then she said something that still haunts me to this day. I think whatever's in the walls wants me to join it. After that, Emily and her family moved away. I never saw her again, but I couldn't stop thinking about her in that house. Over the years, I've pieced together my own theories about what might have been happening. I believe there was someone or something living within the walls of her house. Maybe it was a person, someone who had found a way to hide and move through the structure without being detected. Or maybe it was something not entirely human, something that thrived on fear. The stuffed animals, the disappearing pets, the whispers, everything seemed designed to unnerve us, to break us down mentally. It was like the house itself was alive, feeding off the fear it created. To this day, I can't walk past a stuffed animal display without feeling a chill. I still have nightmares about that hole in the wall, about what might have been lurking just beyond the edges of the darkness, waiting for us to notice it. And I still wonder what happened to Emily, and if she ever found peace, or if the thing in the walls finally got what it wanted. It was the summer of 2010, a time when I was just entering my teenage years. My family decided to take a trip to a city that was about 2 hours away from home. We stayed in a large, oddly designed hotel that had always intrigued me. Looking back, I never asked why we went there or why we stayed at that particular hotel. My parents had planned it, and as a kid, I just went along. Some family friends had also joined us on the trip, and they were staying in rooms close to ours. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. Little did I know that this trip would be anything but relaxing. Even at 12 years old, I was known for being a nervous kid. I startled easily, hated the dark, and always imagined monsters in the shadows. This wasn't unusual for me, and my family had learned to laugh off my overactive imagination. But what happened at that hotel wasn't just a product of my fears. Something very real occurred, something that I still think about to this day. The hotel itself was unusual. Its design made it feel like a maze. The lobby wasn't on the ground floor as you'd expect, but rather on the fourth. To reach it, you had to use an elevator. The staircases were strange, too. None of them seemed to connect directly to the lobby, which I found odd and mildly unsettling from the start. The hotel's floors formed a giant square, with a balcony overlooking the central lobby on every level. This meant that as you walked to your room, You could peer over the edge and see all the way down or up, depending on where you were. I remember clutching the railing and imagining what it would feel like to fall. It wasn't something I liked to think about for long. The first 2 days passed without much incident. My friends and I spent our time playing card games, watching TV, and exploring the brightly lit hallways of the hotel. At night, we told each other ghost stories, trying to outdo one another with tales of haunted houses and spooky woods. I was spooked easily, of course, but it was all in good fun, or so I thought. On the morning of the third day, everything changed. I was woken up by loud screaming. The sound echoed eerily through the open design of the hotel. For a moment, I thought it was part of a dream. But as I shook off my grogginess, I realized the screams were real. Curious and concerned, I stepped out onto the balcony and looked down. In the lobby below, a girl was lying on the floor surrounded by a mess of broken eggs and spilled milk. A small crowd had formed around her, and I could hear fragments of their conversations. "She fainted," one person said. "Call an ambulance," someone else shouted. The sight made my stomach churn. I spotted my family sitting at a table in the lobby, eating breakfast and watching the commotion unfold. I'd decided to head down to join them and find out what was going on. The elevator was on the opposite side of my floor, so I opted to take the stairs instead. It seemed like the faster option at the time. We were on the 7th or 8th floor, so I figured it wouldn't take long to get to the lobby. As I descended, I kept an eye out for the sign marking the 4th floor, but I didn't see it. I passed the 5th floor, then what I thought should be the 4th, but there was no door. I figured I must have missed it somehow, so I kept going. By the time I reached the bottom, I realized I had made a mistake. Instead of the lobby, I found myself in a dimly lit cinder block basement. The walls were cold and gray, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. There were no windows, and the fluorescent lights flickered ominously above me. In front of me stood a pair of heavy double doors. At first I hesitated. I didn't want to go back up the stairs, but I also wasn't sure I wanted to see what was behind those doors. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I pushed them open and stepped inside. What I found was a massive, warehouse-like room. It was filled with stacks of furniture covered in plastic wrap, rows of tables, and what looked like old, forgotten hotel equipment. The space was eerily quiet, save for the hum of an unseen ventilation system. Dust floated in the beams of light that managed to sneak in from the cracks around the door. At the far end of the room, I spotted an elevator. Relieved, I started walking toward it, hoping it would take me back to the lobby. But when I reached it, I noticed it required a key card to operate. Frustrated, I turned back toward the double doors, only to find they had locked behind me. Panic set in. I didn't have a phone, and my parents probably thought I was still in my room. No one knew where I was. I started searching the room for another way out. I opened cabinets, checked behind stacks of boxes, and even peeked under the plastic-wrapped furniture. But there was nothing. No doors, no windows, no escape. Just as I was about to give up, I heard the faint creak of a door opening behind me. I spun around and saw a man stepping through one of the side doors. He was tall and thin, with graying hair and glasses. What struck me as odd was his outfit. He was wearing a lab coat. "What are you doing down here?" he asked, his voice calm but slightly strained. I got lost," I stammered. "Do you have a key to the door?" He didn't answer my question. Instead, he said, "Follow me. I know a way out." Relieved, I started to follow him. But as we walked, something about him felt off. He kept glancing over his shoulder at me, and his pace was slow and deliberate, as if he was stalling. We passed the stairwell door I had come through earlier, but instead of stopping, he led me deeper into the basement. The air grew colder, and the lighting became dimmer. I started to feel uneasy. "Where are we going?" I asked. "This way," he replied curtly. Ahead of us was a row of tall metal shelves stacked with boxes. Beyond them, I could see that the room ended in a blank concrete wall. There was no way out. I stopped walking. "There's nothing over there," I said. The man turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Just follow me," he insisted. At that moment, every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I took a step back and yelled as loud as I could. The sound echoed through the room, startling the man. "What are you doing?" he snapped. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and bolted toward the stairwell door. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, but I didn't look back. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached the door and yanked on the handle. To my relief, it opened. Standing on the other side was a janitor, his expression one of surprise and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. Before I could answer, the man in the lab coat appeared behind me. He started explaining that he was just trying to help me, but the janitor didn't seem convinced. "Let's get you upstairs," the janitor said, ignoring the man. He led me back up to the lobby, where I found my family. I burst into tears as I told them what had happened. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he was doing in the basement. All I know is that I was lucky to get out. My parents' house sits next to a peculiar little red house, one that had always intrigued me for reasons I couldn't quite articulate. Its backyard faces ours, and from our porch I could see the side of the house with a weathered wooden deck and two large windows that seemed to gaze out like vacant eyes. The house was far from abandoned. There were always at least 3 cars parked in the driveway or along the curb. Yet, in all the years we lived there, no one seemed to use them. Not once did I see anyone stepping out to check the mail, take out the trash, or even enjoy the deck on a sunny day. It was as if the house existed in a bubble, completely detached from the world around it. Even the neighbors avoided mentioning it, like some unspoken agreement hung over our quiet street. I was 12 the first time something caught my attention. It was late in the evening, the kind of night where the air feels heavy and still. I was playing in the backyard when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed faint shadows moving on the far wall of the red house through one of the windows. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. There were definitely shape-shifting, like silhouettes of people walking. I froze, transfixed. It was the first time I'd ever seen any sign of life in that house. Over the years, I tried not to think about it too much. Life carried on, and soon my sister moved out, leaving me her basement room. It was a cozy space that had been renovated with care. The room had a door leading directly to the backyard with a small window set into it. My sister had covered the window with a poster of Pulp Fiction to block out the view, but I preferred something lighter and more open. I replaced it with sheer curtains that let in just enough light to feel connected to the outside without exposing too much. The room quickly became my sanctuary. From my bed or the couch, I had a clear view of the door. At night, I would sometimes hear the faint crunch of leaves in the outdoor stairwell leading down to the door. At first, I assumed it was our cat prowling around, but as the weeks went on, I started to feel uneasy. The sounds seemed too deliberate, too heavy for a cat. One night, my boyfriend was over while my parents were working late. We were sitting on the couch talking and laughing when he suddenly went silent. His eyes were fixed on the small window in the door, his face pale. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" I asked, already feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "A camera flash," he said, his voice barely audible. I tried to laugh it off, telling him he must have imagined it. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the creeping unease that clung to me. When it came time to sleep, I kept glancing at the gap between the curtains, my heart racing every time I thought I saw movement in the shadows. The stairwell outside was pitch dark. There was no light installed there, so even if someone were standing at the bottom of the stairs, I wouldn't have been able to see them clearly. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of leaves crunching underfoot. This time, the steps were heavy, deliberate. My blood ran cold. I should have stayed in bed, locked the door, and called someone for help. But for reasons I still can't explain, I decided to confront whoever or whatever was out there. Barefoot and trembling, I flung the door open. The cool night air hit me, and I immediately scanned the stairwell. It was empty. I hesitated for a moment before stepping outside and climbing the stairs to the backyard. That's when I saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood near the edge of our yard, partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. He wore a grimy mechanic's jumpsuit, and in his hands he held an old digital camera, the kind that looked like it hadn't been used in a decade. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a baseball cap, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unblinking. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other, frozen in a bizarre, silent standoff. The longer I looked at him, the more a sickening dread settled in my stomach. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he stood there, like he belonged in the shadows, watching. Finally, I found my voice and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" My words seemed to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. Without a word, he turned and bolted toward the red house, disappearing into the darkness like a phantom. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. It wasn't until the sound of his footsteps faded completely that I managed to move, stumbling back into the house and locking the door behind me. The next morning, I told my parents everything. They were understandably alarmed, but tried to reassure me it was probably just some vagrant passing through. But I knew better. The way that man had looked at me, the way he had stood there as if he had every right to be watching. It wasn't the first time he'd been there, and it wouldn't have been the last if I hadn't confronted him. After that night, the sounds stopped. No more crunching leaves, no more flashes of light. The red house remained as lifeless as ever, its secrets locked away behind those blank, staring windows. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, carrying the faint scent of decaying leaves and damp earth, I can't help but wonder, how many nights had he been there, standing silently in the shadows, watching me through the glass,